Hello and welcome to Torah Thoughts. I want to start off by saying a prayer for a full and speedy recovery to my grandmother Miriam Esther Bat Malka, who will be celebrating Bli Ayin Hara, her 93rd birthday, this coming week. May she go back to full health and remain healthy and happy till 120. Now, the portion of the Torah that we read this week's Parsha, is Parshat Terumah. Literally translated, Terumah means donations, or more accurately, contributions. So what's going on here is the nation of Israel had just received the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai, but contrary to what most people think, they didn't only receive the Ten Commandments, they received all 613 commandments found in the Torah. And in this particular Parsha, we are reading about how God described to Moshe the commandments pertaining to the building of the Mishkan. What is the Mishkan? The Mishkan is it's a temple. It's temporary because the Jews were in the desert, obviously, and it was somewhat in the form of a tent. The temple can be built. It's collapsible, and whenever they traveled, they would take it down and then set it up again whenever they pitch camp. This is obviously not the temple of King Solomon, which was built hundreds of years later on our Temple Mount. This was actually the Mishkan was actually taken with the nation of Israel as they came into Israel, and they used it for several hundred years until the Beit HaMikdash, Solomon's temple, was built. And so this Mishkan was situated in the city of Shiloh in Israel. It's a portion of Israel that was liberated in the Six-Day War in 1967. And several hundred years later, King David purchased our Temple Mount, and his son, King Solomon, built the Beit HaMikdash there. But anyway, back to the Mishkan. So the Torah says that everyone has to contribute. If we're going to build a Mishkan, we're going to need supplies, right? So everybody has to contribute supplies and materials that they're going to need to build this Mishkan. And so what does everyone have to bring, and how much do they have to bring? Well, the Torah says, Kol ish asher yidvenu libo. Everyone should bring supplies in accordance with how his heart compels him. Basically, it means bring as much as you want, and from the list of materials that we need, bring whatever you deem appropriate. It's kind of interesting. So I think this kind of applies as a lesson, as a much broader lesson. I'll get to that in a minute. But the Mishkan, it was the first major project that the nation of Israel was assigned, and this was completely. It wasn't passive. It was an active mitzvah. Until now, everything that was done to them, the 10 plagues, the splitting of the sea, the receiving of the Torah and the 10 commandments at Sinai, it was all passive. They can sit back, and God did the activity for them. God created the 10 plagues. God split the sea. God conveyed to them the commandments. But now God is saying, you're going to build me a Mishkan. And what the meaning of a Mishkan actually is a dwelling. It says, V'asu li mikdash, and they shall make for me a sanctuary, V'shachanti b'tocham. The word Mishkan and Shachanti are related. V'shachanti b'tocham means, and I will dwell among them. So God is saying, build me a home, and then I'm going to come and live among you. So, interesting. Everything that was done for us, the plagues, the splitting of the sea, giving us the Torah, God did that, but now we're going to do something for Him. And so I believe that this particular parsha serves as a metaphor for the operation for us and how we operate as a nation. And the reason why this dawned upon me is because it has to do with the Israeli elections. That is, there's elections going on in Israel. It's coming up this Tuesday. And it's actually the longest running election, I believe, in the history of any modern democracy. This started actually roughly a year ago. They had an election, and following it's a parliament, so following the election, someone has to be able to form a government that constitutes a majority of the parliament members. This can either be one big party or a coalition of several parties. Well, no big party, in the history of Israel, no one ever had a complete majority, but in this particular case, no one was able to put together a coalition that would form a majority of 61 Knesset members. So they had to, for the first time in Israel's history, they had to go to a second round of voting, And still no one was able to form a coalition of a majority. So for the first time in history, they are going now, this Tuesday, to a third round of elections. And by all indications from the polls, it seems like they're going to continue to be in a stalemate. Now, what's the reason why, from all the parties that make it into the Knesset, none of them can manage to get together and form a coalition of 61 seats? The reason for it, well, there's two reasons. First of all, there's the Arab Party in Israel. The Arab Party constitutes 13 seats out of the 120 seats. For various reasons, the Arab Party will not sit in any coalition. There are several Knesset parties that won't sit with them. They won't sit with several Knesset parties. And on top of that, the members of that particular party, by and large, they see their duty as Knesset members, they see their duty as to undermine the existence of a Jewish state. And so they've never in the history of Israel sat in a coalition in the government, and I don't believe they intend to this time. So if you have 13 seats out of 120 that are already taken off the board, you're left with 107 seats, and you still need an absolute majority. You need 61 seats. So 61 out of 107, that's no longer a 51% majority. That's more like a 57 or a 58% majority, which is much, much more difficult. But still possible. I mean, they've been doing it. They've done it in the past. So another obstacle, a major obstacle, is there's a major rift going on right now in Israeli politics between religious and secular, the religious parties and the secular parties. And it centers around roughly, not exclusively, but mainly one issue, which is the draft into the army. The ultra-Orthodox, I guess that's the best way to describe it, the Haredim in Israel, the parties that represent that particular constituency, they work very hard to ensure that their constituents have an exemption from the draft to the army, the exemption being that they're attending yeshiva study. There are several secular parties that are they're offended by that, they're absolutely against it, and they seriously want they want the religious to be drafted into the army as well. And those two opinions, there is no compromise so far from either side. No, you must serve in the army just like my children do. And they're like, no, we will not give up. I suppose our children need to study Torah. I mean, that's the main argument. Our children need to study Torah, and therefore they can't go to the army, and the Torah is more important than the army, or just as important, or what have you. And the debate rages on, and if you have, on the one hand, you have the Arab party, who's not going to be in any government, and now you're left with the religious parties and the secular parties who won't join together in any government. That leaves pretty much, you do the math, there's just no way to build a government. And I think this particular parsha addresses what's going on here. Some people are cut out for certain things and some people aren't. Granted, Torah is very important. Everybody must, not everybody, it's very important that our nation have Torah. We can't survive without it. And not everybody's cut out for studying Torah. Same thing with an army. I don't think, it makes no sense for us to not have an army, but not everyone's cut out to fight in an army. However, the Torah does say, for the religion, if you're religious, the Torah says that every male from age 20 to 60 must participate in the fighting forces. Very, very few exceptions. So going back to what the Parsha tells us, yes, everyone must participate. Some people can participate this way, some people that way, some people a little more, some people a little less. But everyone must participate. Why? Because if you're going to function as a unit, as a nation, you must own a piece of it. You must be a part of it. You must have a role. Problem, of course, is that the religious parties claim, yes, our role is to study Torah. And your role is to be in the army. Now, if you look at this particular parsha, it kind of says, yeah, everyone participates in their own way. Now, think about this. If everyone in the nation of Israel, in the desert, if they all brought, what's the most valuable of all the materials? If everybody brought gold, but nobody bought goatskins, that's not good. You wouldn't be able to build a Mishkan. By the same token, if everyone in Israel studied Torah, but nobody joined the army, I think we would get overrun by our enemies. And the argument that, well, if we study Torah, then God will protect us, that history tells us that that's not how it works. And in fact, the Torah tells us that that's not how it works. On the other hand, if everyone in Israel joined the army, but didn't study Torah, that would be even worse. And the reason for that is, if we had the strongest army in the world, but we didn't have Torah, then we're no longer the nation that we were meant to be, and it's all pointless. On the other hand, if we have no army, and take the worst calamities we've experienced, take the Holocaust, the worst catastrophes we've experienced, yet the nation survives, right? So not having Torah, we won't survive at all. That would be even worse. So no, you can't have a nation without Torah, and you can't have a nation without a fighting force. And this parsha teaches us that everyone can contribute in some fashion or another. Now, there's another very, very important role, which is served by, I guess you call the nationalist religious, and that role is to show by example that it's possible to do both. You could serve in the army and study Torah. And there's a program in Israel called Hesder where they actually do that. So that's another important role. Now, how much Torah will you study, and how much army service will you provide? Again, this parsha tells us that each person must do that according to their own specific means and the case by case basis. Now again, remember the Jews, when they brought the materials for the Mishkan, they didn't just bring one material. It's not that one person brought gold and one person brought silver. Everyone brought several materials. One person can donate gold and copper and linen. Same way, you can go to the army, you can study Torah, you can give charity, you can run a business. You could do a little bit of each, or a lot of this and a little of that. Now, truth be told, nobody wants the Haredim to join the army. That's the truth. The Haredi leaders, obviously, they want a captive audience. They want the people who are growing up once they come army age to stay within their circle of operation, to stay within their sphere of influence, so that they know that they have their followers, they have their donators, they have their community. The Haredi politicians, of course, similarly, they want guaranteed votes. They promise something to their constituents, and once you go to the army, you become you reach out, you become part of other groups, you become part of different constituencies. They have to do with where you live, it may have to do with your income bracket. There's other ways that people get classified as what section they belong in, and the Haredi politicians want their constituents to stay, again, a captive audience to them because it's guaranteed votes. Then you have the secular politicians. They do not want the Haredim in the army. They simply want to be able to complain. Don't vote for them because the Haredim don't go to the army. And boy, do they milk it. They milk it to the point of anti-Semitism. And not because they want them to go to the army. And there's proof of it because at some point their bluff was called and they weren't that keen about it. They just want to be able to complain against the Haredi, against the religious. Look at them, they're leeching off of us, they're not going, and so on. Then, of course, you got the right-wing politicians. The right-wing politicians want to be able to tell the religious parties, they want leverage. I'll make sure to get your constituency, the exemptions that you need for them, so join my coalition. And this is leverage that they need. This is leverage that they've been using, that both parties really have been using since the existence of the state. And they have no interest in getting these Haredim to serve. They just have an interest in using that issue to build a coalition. The army itself doesn't want them. The army, there are religious people in the army, and the army has no patience to deal with their religious needs. Certainly the Haredim, who are going to need a minyan, they're going to need a shul with a Sefer Torah, with the Torah scroll on it, and they're going to need specific standards of kashrut, of kosher food. This is not something that they want to deal with, to put up with. And then, of course, and also the army, especially ever since the crime that the army committed, that the Israeli army committed in Gush Katif by expelling 10,000 Jews from their homes in Gaza, there was an issue where there were soldiers who said, "No, excuse me, that's against Jewish law, and my following of the Torah comes above my following of my army commander. I won't violate Torah." And the army does not want to have to put up with that kind of stuff. They don't need religion. They don't want religious people in their army. And of course, the ultra secular activists, the ones who complained the loudest about the Haredim not going to the army, they complained once religious Jews started showing up in the army. They began to complain, this is no good because they're having too much influence on the culture in the army. In Israel, army is like somewhat of a coming of age. It's a rite of passage. and a lot of your cultural identity gets formed during the years in the army, and the ultra secularists do not want the religious to have access to that kind of influence, and they've openly complained about it, and they've actually openly spoken about how, what are we going to do when too many religious people become officers in the army, because the truth is that they're the ones who are most motivated. The religious people who do go to the army, they join the officer corps, they join the elite combat units, and so on, and the secular complain about that. So who does want the Haredi youth to go to the army? The Haredi youth. They want to go. They want to be soldiers. They want to experience Israeli culture. They want to experience life. They're the only ones who want it. And they're the only ones who don't get any form of a say. So this one issue that is splitting Israeli society, it's paralyzing them to the point where they can't have a government. It's a non-issue, and everyone's trying to use it to their own advantage. But suppose they do go to the army. Again, I believe it is, if I lived in Israel, and I believe that it is an obligation. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. But once you go to the army, again, like this parsha says, you can serve various roles. All right, everyone according to their abilities. The army has many non-combat roles. This whole argument of, well, this guy dies in the army and you don't. Well, no, guess what? Everybody who joins the army, the secular, the right, the left, the religious, they can, if they choose, they can participate in non-combat roles. The army has a band. They have a choir. They have people who sing in the army. They have photographers. So they have journalists in the army as journalists. So why not have one of the activities in the army, Torah? Torah is in fact very central to our identity. It's central to our culture. It's central to our survival. That's a matter of history. Why not have, just like you have people who are into art and into music, and they get to the army, they can actually do something along those lines while they're in the army. Why not have some people teach ethics based on Torah or something along those lines in the army? Well, they don't want that. There are Chabadnikim, people who belong to the Chabad movement, who go to the army. Once they're in the army base, they help other Jews, put tefillin, and the army hates that. The brass hates that. So this is a big rift, a big fight that's going on. And I want to also mention that one of the most famous military leaders in post-temple era, one of the most famous Jewish military leaders was Bar Kokhba, who led the revolution against the Roman Empire, nearly succeeded, and his rabbi, his spiritual leader, Rabbi Akiva, who was one of the most famous, one of the most widely respected leaders in all of Jewish history. He sent all of his students, it was something like 10,000 or 15,000 students, he sent them to join Bar Kokhba's army. But on the other hand, Rabbi Akiva also cautioned against abandoning Torah, no matter what the cost. And what he said was, when the Romans outlawed the study of Torah, Rabbi Akiva said, well, even if your life is at stake, for us to stop the study, to even pause the study of Torah, would be suicidal. We would cease to exist as a nation. He compared it to a fish out of water. If the fisherman is coming to try to catch the fish, you may get caught, you may not get caught. But if the fish jumps out of the water to escape the fisherman, then he'll certainly die. And it's a similar thing with Torah. So getting back to the Mishkan, there's two components within the Mishkan that, again, I think also serves as a tremendous, a beautiful metaphor for our nation, and for the way the nation functions. And that is the Ark of the Covenant, or more specifically, the Kaporet, the cover to the Ark of the Covenant, and the menorah, the famous candelabra, the famous menorah that we know from the story of Hanukkah, when the Maccabees recaptured our Beit HaMikdash on our Temple Mount, and as part of the dedication of it, they didn't have enough oil that was appropriate for the lighting of the menorah. It lasted 8 days, and so forth. So we have the menorah and the Ark of the Covenant, and those are the two extremes. The Ark of the Covenant, the Aron, it represents exclusivity. It represents super holiness. The Ark sat in the Holy of Holies. The cover on the Ark with the keruvim on it, the picture of the angels with children's faces and the wings, that was made of solid gold. That was the cover that went onto the Ark. And what was inside the Ark? Obviously the tablets, the Ten Commandments, Moshe's staff with which he performed through which God performed the 10 plagues, a jar of man. So anyway, but again, getting back to the Ten Commandments, the Ark was the epitome of holiness. You couldn't even touch it. You had two sticks that ran alongside that was attached to it, and you had to hold it by the sticks. You weren't even allowed to touch the ark. The epitome of holiness. And the menorah is opposite. The menorah is represented accessibility. The menorah was put next to, there was windows in the Beit HaMikdash, and the purpose of the menorah was to shine a spiritual light out onto the world. And the menorah and the ark, those are the two only, if I'm not mistaken, the only two components within the Beit HaMikdash that had to be made of one piece of gold. You couldn't solder different pieces together to form. Imagine a candelabra, with all the you had to form that out of one piece of gold, which is similar to the nation, with all the differences that we have, with all the animosity that exists. If we were to all be one cohesive unit, then we would succeed. That would be the key to getting past all of these problems. And if we do that, then we see the next step, which is God finishes the job. Like I said earlier, God gave us the task of building the Mishkan, but when He gave us, He too is involved. He's a part of it, right? Everyone does according to their abilities, right? But once we've done our part, once we've reached the limit of our abilities, God does the rest. Where do we see this? Again, the menorah. God tells Moshe, He describes to him what the menorah is going to look like, and it has to be made of one solid piece of gold. And Moshe just didn't get it. Moshe, with all of his brilliance and all of his divine vision, didn't get what God meant when He explained the menorah. And God said to him, take a certain, I think it was like a kikar, a certain measurement of gold, throw it into a flame so that it melts, and I'll do the rest. And Moshe did that, and God made it form into the shape of what we now know as the menorah. So again, he also had his role and his participation. But because Moshe was commanded to do the menorah, and Moshe did whatever portion of doing the menorah that he was able to, he gets the credit. It's considered that he built the menorah. So too with us. We do our part. The result isn't in our hands. The result is in God's hands. He'll do His part, and then we will succeed, provided that we stick together as one piece. That's my Torah thought. What's yours? Thank you for watching. Shabbat Shalom.